Hello and welcome to Ways to Change the World. I'm Krishnan Guru-murthy, and this is the podcast in which we talk to extraordinary people about the big ideas in their lives and the events that have helped shape them. We're on coronavirus lockdown edition, sort of version 3 or 4 now, so I'm actually on holiday in the southwest of England doing this, and we're talking to people over the internet. So the technical quality isn't what it would be if we were in the studio, but I hope you'll forgive that for the sake of listening to what people have to say, which is really important. My guest today is Chris Boardman. He's probably Britain's most important cycling evangelist, but he's a champion cyclist, and that's how he became famous back in 1992, winning Britain's first Olympic gold medal in the sport for decades. He then went on to win several stages of the Tour de France, although not the event overall. He's founded his own brand of cycling, of bikes. He's a policy advisor to the sport's governing body, British Cycling. And he's also the cycling czar for Greater Manchester. But these days you'll hear him and see him on the radio and TV, most often arguing the case for a fundamental shift in the way we use our personal transport. So Chris, welcome to Ways to Change the World. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Lay out how you would like us to live. I mean, should we just get rid of our cars?
Well, I think we've allowed something that's easy. And I think we've all got to recognise that as human beings, we are built to do the easiest thing for me right now, even if we actually know it's to our own long-term or even short-term detriment. And we've allowed the car to fill that niche because it is easy. I can jump in, I don't get stressed, I'm not particularly physically challenged, and I'm allowed to do it for 1 kilometre journeys. And it's now got to the point where it's damaging our lives and it's ruining the quality of our lives. So there's nothing wrong fundamentally with the concept of a car. But now, like many things in life, it's just got so out of proportion that it's actually doing more harm than good. And it's a really difficult problem to unpick because we have a finite amount of street space. And if we want to now reutilise that for something else, be it cafe tables or just letting kids be able to walk to school in safety and parents feel confident enough to let them, then we instantly meet challenge because we have to take that road space from something else. And although we like the right to change, we don't actually like it when it happens. So we're at that point now, and we're starting to react to it because all the problems we are facing can be tackled by using the simple bicycle and our feet to get around for short journeys.
Look, obviously we've been through a weird period in British history in which cycling massively exploded in its use, and people started to think about it in a totally different way and started to consider, going to work on it as a regular mode of transport and getting about on a bike instead of a car or a bus out of necessity. But do you feel that slipping away as we return to normal?
Well, I think the very, very short answer is yes, it is, but it doesn't have to. And I think some of it has stuck. So, I mean, the coronavirus period, nobody would have wished it on anybody. People are dying. We have to be careful that we frame things that this isn't this fantastic opportunity. But equally, we also can't deny the fact that we turned off global traffic. We turned it off for 5 months, and we let people have the thing that stopped them getting around by bike and on foot that they haven't had for decades and decades, and we're almost moving into a century. We had safe space, and we found that for the reasons that you just alluded to, so the buses aren't running frequently at all. There's not many people can go on them. I've got to get to work. How am I going to do that? I'm bored and I'm locked in my house all day, every day, but I can have a bit of exercise. I've got kids that need something to do. What am I going to do? And for all the reasons, coupled with an incredible piece of weather that we had in April, people went out and rode bikes. And in some places, cycle use, while all other transport modes went down between 60 and 90%, understandably, cycle use went up 300%. And in Greater Manchester, we were seeing weekly peaks of 70% up on pre-COVID levels. So we kind of had the biggest consultation you could ever have. We said, right, will people ride bikes? And they said, they showed that when you give them the environment, they will. And then you consider the bigger crisis that we have looming in the background with health, with pollution, with climate change. this is a way, something that could positively impact all of those if we keep it. So I think we've had an experience, and it will be a tragedy on a global scale if we didn't capitalise on it.
Well, how did you discover cycling? I mean, do you remember the thrill or the moment that you thought this is something special?
Well, I can remember when, probably like most kids, the first time I rode a bike without stabilisers and riding it around the cul-de-sac where we lived. And I think, again, like most kids, the bicycle represented a little bit of freedom and the ability to explore a bit further. And I was fortunate that was in an era when you literally went outside the house on your bike with your mates and rode around, and that was fine. And somehow, in the space of one lifetime, most parents will not do that now for fear of safety, and we're all losing out as a result.
Who taught you?
I was taught by parents. I can't remember at the time. I can remember the little bike. It was a little blue rally chippy with white fat tyres, but I can't remember. It will have been my mum or my dad. My kids, I have to confess, I taught only one of my 6 children to ride a bike. They were all, 2 were taught by an instructor, which was absolutely fantastic, and the others were taught by my parents.
Was that just out of necessity because you didn't have time, or?
I just don't think I was very, very good at it. I'm not sure. It's probably a very psychological answer as much as anything else. I think when I was a youngster, because we had kids very young, we had Edward when we were 20, Sally and I was still growing up myself. And I'm obsessed with myself and my own performance. Being a sports person, you're almost actively encouraged from an early age to be selfish. And I probably wasn't the best parent. Hopefully I've got a bit better.
What about competitive cycling? Because, I mean, obviously, these days, we've grown up over the last, almost decade with it kind of being normal for British athletes to be brilliant at cycling and to be world champions. That wasn't the case when you were growing up.
No, it wasn't. We used to turn up and compete in most of the major races, and then we'd stand at the back clapping somebody else on the podium. It was pretty standard. When you were British, you were there to make up the numbers and be part of that crowd at the end. So it wasn't normal for us. But for me, it was a lifestyle, like most clubs, I think, probably the same as football, cricket, anything else. It was my social life. Didn't have a great time at school. I suppose I was bullied, really, and couldn't wait to leave, never regretted it. And cycling at the time was my thing, something that I discovered early on that I could do that other people couldn't. And I found something that gave me self-esteem and self-confidence. And then it was a big part of my social life, and then it became my sport, and then it became my job. So I kind of drifted along. I've managed to get to 52 now without having a proper job, and I'm making a good fist of it, I think.
Why were you bullied?
Well, I think like most kids at school, particularly, I think of an era, 40 odd years ago, in that school was just kids fight, and that's what kids do. And only in retrospect, you look back and you think, yeah, I suppose that was bullying, really. I wasn't looking forward to going to school. Used to get pushed around a lot, and those things were just normal. And thankfully now it's one of the things that has improved, that it's not accepted as normal.
But how did your horizons, broaden to the point at which you thought you could be an athlete? Was it your parents pushing you down that road? Or?
My parents were very much involved with cycling. It was their sport, and so our weekends orbited around it. So of a weekend, we used to have a little hand-painted minivan, and 6 o'clock in the morning, we'd push off from where we lived in the small town of Hoylake, and there'd be my dad's racing bike strapped to the roof, probably a canoe, and a couple of cousins or friends shoved in the back as well. He'd go and ride his race for a couple of hours, and while we entertained ourselves exploring, and then we go and do something with the rest of the day. So I actually had away from school, I had a fantastic childhood, and I was very lucky that I had a whole social life that didn't depend on school, somewhere to escape to, and then somewhere to start to find self-confidence. Sport teaches you so many things, dealing with pressure, the ability to learn from an experience and go, wow, that didn't work out. What do I need to do differently? Off you go with version 2. So it was an environment where you could learn an awful lot about life safely.
Were you a sort of a normal sporty kid though? Because I
No,
mean,
I was rubbish. I was rubbish at those things. I mean, very, very ordinary. And the first bike race I ever rode was a small event just outside Chester, and they'd time you for 10 miles against a clock, and people turned up in cut-off jeans and football shorts. And afterwards, there's a piece of A4 paper pinned to the lamppost with the results on, handwritten, and my name was right down the bottom there. But I think that the beauty of racing against the clock in particular is that was my result. And then I could go and compete with myself next week until eventually I was in front of the other schoolboys. And that was something I'd never experienced before. But no, I wasn't particularly sporty at all. Tried a few different things, but I was very much middle of the pack.
I mean, is this a sport? You know, I mean, if you're into cycling, are you not a team player? You know, is it a sport for a loner?
That's a good point. I think there's a lot of individualism about it. I mean, lots of cyclists every weekend around the country, they go out in groups. It can be as sociable as anything else. But a lot of the competition can be with yourself, and it can be very tactical. I think at the professional level, you work very much as part of a team, but you can pretty much do it every way you wanted. But yeah, it can be. I think it's probably unique in that it is a sport that you can do as part of a pack, part of a group, or completely solitary. I tend towards the latter these days, so it fits in around my life rather than my life fitting in around everybody else's.
I mean, when you look at the last sort of 10 years of British cycling and the stars that it's kicked up, you know, do you to some degree think they're in your wake? You know, you were sort of the first sort of superstar British cyclist, if you like, you know, with technology and, you know, and excitement around you for quite a while.
Well, the gold medal in 1992 was our first in 72, 73 years. And that was the first time, I think, for a very long time, that Great Britain thought, geez, we can actually win stuff. What do we do with this? And we were all a little bit shell-shocked, no least me. I thought the whole thing would just die away after 3 months. And here we are more than a quarter of a century later, still talking about it. And it's not false modesty, I don't think, to say that that experience, it did kickstart it, but not because of me. I was almost incidental. It was a gentleman called Peter Keane, who was my coach at the time, had been for 15 years. And Peter was an academic, is an academic. And he was fascinated by how things work and to create ways to go faster and then to create plans. So a couple of years later, when lottery funding came along, and everyone went, great money, because it was such an amateur sport where you were qualified by virtue of the fact you could take time off work. This huge influx of cash. And they went, great money. What do we do with it? Because we weren't set up for it. And then Peter King went, I've got a plan. We did this in 92. And based on that, I have a plan to set up a world-class performance program. And the national governing body, UK Sport, went, great, here's some cash. And it worked. In 2000, we got another gold medal. 2004, we got more gold medals. So I think there's a linear path, but I think it's very fair to say more attached to Peter Keane than myself.
It seems to have dried up a little, doesn't it, right now?
Well, it's got a lot more competitive. The thing that we did, because I got involved in 2004 behind the scenes with British Cycling as part of the senior management team, and we looked for the first time properly in the world of cycling into aerodynamics. And I led the R&D program, and it was embarrassingly revolutionary because all the answers are there in a different world in aerodynamics, and they'd always been there, but we'd never asked. So we brought in aerodynamicists, and they changed the way we did things, and we stole a march for a decade. And it's taken that long for the rest of the world to catch up and realize just how important it is to manage airflow. When 90% of your energy is pushing air out of the way, it's everything. And now they have caught up and in a lot of areas surpassed us, which is, I think, good for the health of the sport, but not great when you're British at the moment.
So why do you think, having had this period of sort of 8 years or so of British Tour de France champions, taking it for granted in many ways, it may have stopped this year for a while?
Well, I think like everybody who's successful, it always seems to come back to psychology. That first of all, you've got nothing to lose, and so you'll push things. You live on the ragged edge. You'll try new ideas because you want to be successful. Then when you get successful, you go, great, we've got a formula, don't change it. And of course, that's how the last group of winners went wrong. And that's what's happened to Great Britain. I think there's been an awful lot of, first of all, complete revolution and innovation in its true sense. And then it became development, just nibbling at the edges, taking something, we know that works, don't do too much, just see if we can polish it a bit. When other people were losing and going, right, we need to do this differently. And they then became the innovators. So it's part of a natural cycle. And I think it makes it more interesting to watch, frankly.
So has what drives you changed over the years, from sort of your personal goals to team goals and driving the technology to policy now?
I think specifically in the specifics, life has changed beyond recognition. I don't spend too much of my life watching bike races, and though I still will be working on this year's Tour de France, and I'm really looking forward to that. Most of it, I've got sensible pants on, and I'm starting to look at the bicycle as a mode of transport, a way to get to the shops, to work, and seeing just what an incredible device it is. It's right up there with the printing press. It's not hyperbole to say it's a machine that could change the world for the better if we let it. And that's become very much my focus. But I think at the root of it all, going right back to being a carpenter in my teens, I just love making things. I love making things, and I'm fascinated by seeing if we can make things better. So it was a personal performance. Then it was the world-class performance program, making bicycles, and now it's about a transport system. So I just keep bumping into interesting things, and they all seem to involve bikes.
I mean, you mentioned the carpentry. Was that your fallback?
Well, I never fell back to it. I've still got a workshop at home, and I love wood. I like making things, and I still do. I just renovated an old rowboat that I found in the bushes when we moved to the house that we're living in now, and utterly love it. And I think what I enjoy most about it is when you're creating something, you stop thinking about your day job. You stop thinking, because you have to focus on this problem and how am I going to bend that piece of wood around this. And I absolutely love it. So it was there at the start, and it will probably be there at the end.
I mean, when you talk about the bike as a piece of machinery, then now, I mean, have we tried to sort of leapfrog the bike to other types of transport without thinking about where we could take the bike next?
Well, I think like most things, it becomes normal, and you're looking for what's new, what's fun, and what's easier. So the bicycle's put to one side, and we've got carriages because that's easier, and it can carry more loads, and then cars and vans, and we get interested, and we've forgotten this thing left propped against the wall is actually brilliant, and we're just reawakening to that. In the last few months, as we've discussed, has reminded us that thing propped against the wall, it's really good, isn't it? It's actually really good fun. It's really efficient. A third of journeys that we make, where I work in Greater Manchester now as cycling and walking commissioner, a third of car journeys, over 200 million every year, less than a kilometre. And we cleared the roads, and people noticed the bike. They'd gone on it on a nice quiet road. They didn't feel threatened, and went, this is really good. I'd like to get around like this. So we've kind of rediscovered it. And then in rediscovering how nice it is, we start to think about it and think, actually, this isn't polluting. This is saving me money. It's good for my health. Why don't we do more of this? And I think what's most exciting is that the first time in living memory for me, at a governmental level, it's being seen as a solution. Even if you don't like cycling, it's like the least problematic solution to so many of the problems that we face. So it's an exciting period.
I mean, so if we were to transform our cities and towns, is it just about segregated cycle paths, or is it more complicated than that?
I think it's actually simpler than that. And I think part of my job working in Greater Manchester was to make everything into a language that people understand and a language they value, because we've been drowning in facts and figures of why we should change the way we travel for years and not change, because it's not how we make decisions. So when we talk about making nicer places to live and not having rat runs and saving money by not having to drive everywhere and no parking fees, talk about things that people want. So to give people fundamentally what they want, the simplest messages, they want safe space. So if you're riding down your street, right outside your house, would you ride a bike there? They'll go, yeah. Well, why don't you? Well, because I get to the end of the road and it's really busy. Okay, so that's the problem. It's not your road. No. Well, what about if we got you across that road? So be it a cycle path, be it a prioritised crossing, whatever it might be. Would you ride on the other side? Yeah. Okay, and then you get to the next one. What about if we get you across that? And you realise that most of the problems are severance. About 80% of the roads in the UK are less than 6 cars a minute. So they feel relatively safe, but they're constantly intersected by these severance points, be it canals, railways, major roads. And where people want to go often has got busy. And that's the point when you need to go, right, I won't feel safe if you mix me with traffic. Therefore, I have to have protected space. And that's when you have cycle paths. So it's horses for courses, really. I mean, a filtered neighbourhood, which is a term you'll get more and more familiar with in the coming months. Sometimes that's just planters and bollards that are used. So people can go to an area if they work there or if they live there, but they can't drive through it. You've got to go around. It doesn't make it easy. You can get into the centre from different directions, but you can't go through it. And that's the sort of thing that we need to stop.
How complicated is it to plan these things? I mean, when you have a filtered neighbourhood or bollards or a path near where you live, and it suddenly dramatically changes your route to work or how long it takes you to get from A to B if you're in a car or a bus, you might think, which idiot designed this and how did they do it?
I think you need, it's not complicated at all, but it does involve reallocation of space, and that causes friction. And I think about 30% of people won't accept the change unless they experienced it for themselves. So you saw in Waltham Forest in London, when the filtered neighbourhoods there were proposed, they bring a lot of supplementary measures. So they had residence parking. So yeah, you can park outside your house, but that's just spaces for you. So trying to keep the amount of cars down and cars off pavements. They reduce the speeds and they put in things to stop you using it as a cut through. So to start with, just the simple fact that it was different and a change, and that we couldn't do all these things I would normally do in a car. There was uproar. There was protests with people with coffins on their shoulders saying this is the death of Waltham Forest. And then they did it. They had the political courage to push through, and they did it. And now you'd get the same level of protest if you tried to take it out. So that's where political courage comes in. And it's hard for councillors because most councillors are they're shopkeepers and locksmiths and have normal jobs, and they've taken on this role. And now they've got neighbours screaming at them because they're proposing to change this streetscape. So they won't put up with a lot of aggro. They'll just go for status quo unless you give them an incentive to do so.
How much of a problem is our cycling culture, which is so different, it seems, to a lot of continental Europe, and the way it's sort of built up around, well, men for a start, lycra, road bikes, cycling fast through towns and cities?
One thing I think we're all lacking behind on is communication. We've lost control of the message, and we've allowed people who don't want to change, the vocal minority, and they are a minority, about 10% of people just don't want change no matter what, and we don't care if it kills us all and kills the planet. We've allowed them to control the messaging. And so cyclist now has an image of lycra and going fast and inconsiderate in a lot of places, when actually it can be just somebody going to the shops for a loaf of bread. Or kids going to school, and that image is blotted out. And I think we need to get control of it and repaint what a cyclist is. In fact, I've actively tried to avoid using the term cyclist in Greater Manchester. We've gone for not having to use a car, because ultimately that's what we're talking about. Wouldn't you like to not have to use your car? And if you frame it like that, people go, oh yeah, I would.
But I ask you about cycling culture because as a cyclist myself, I mean, when I started cycling, I think I found almost as intimidating other cyclists as cars. And I found the only way actually to end up dealing with it was to become one of them, and to cycle sort of aggressively, sort of holding your ground and, being quite fast and darting in and out, and that was the way to cycle through London because that's what everyone does.
And that's how you drive through London as well, isn't it? I mean, that's how you use road space in London, in that it's stressful, it's competitive, it makes people slightly irritated, and people deal with that by...
And you shout a lot as you cycle.
Yeah, and so the environment, if you like, has created the type, or has attracted and retained the type of person who can deal with that environment. So people who are a little bit timid, a little bit frail, they're just not even there. So you're left with a core group of people who can deal with it, and they'll have a challenge, and they'll go out there and they'll get stuck in. So it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. And if you create safe space for people to ride slowly and easily park outside the shop, then you'll get a whole different type of people. I mean, we've got a nation, the vast majority of people know how to ride a bike. We're already a nation of potential cyclists. We're just not doing it because we don't feel safe.
But whenever you raise this sort of question of how cyclists behave, in a public space, cyclists get very defensive and they say, yeah, but cyclists don't kill people. It's cars that kill people. And, they don't like to talk about their own behaviour. When the truth is, we kind of all need to talk about how we act on the road.
We do, and I think you've almost hit the nail on the head there, in that we have to talk about behaviour. So why would a cyclist be any better or worse behaved than anybody else? They're unlikely to be. They're just people. I think the difference is that, and personally, I think that all rules of the road should be enforced for everybody. Of course, cyclists, they shouldn't go through a red light. They should have courtesy to pedestrians. All of that stuff, of course, they would. And if you have the resources to police it, then you just do everybody who didn't, because most people in society, regardless of how they're travelling, I'm afraid they react and change according to consequences, not morals. It just so happens that if you're in a car, you can do incredible damage. So I think cyclists as a group tend to get defensive because the stats don't bear it out. You've got, I think it's 66 people killed by cars every year on the pavement, and there's less than one person a year who's killed in a collision with a cyclist. So I think that bit is missed.
I mean, you've obviously had more and more to do with politics as well over the years. How important is political leadership?
Well, leadership is everything. I mean, the evidence for change and just stopping the volume of car use, to start to reduce it, is good for all of us. It makes sense. Mentioned before, we're drowning in evidence, but that involves change. People don't like it, and if you take away something they want to do now, they're going to get quite antsy about it. So you have to have politicians with the courage to push through that, in the knowledge that people will prefer it once it's in place. And that's a leap of faith, and that's leadership. And the go-to excuse has always been money. And during the pandemic, that excuse has been taken away. And that's been fascinating to watch, where we've gone, right, we've got a third, well, in Greater Manchester it's a third, the rest of the country it's a quarter of households don't have a car, and you've got public transport running at a quarter of its capacity. Therefore, you've got hundreds of thousands of people who have no other way of travelling. So they're either going to put everyone at risk, or they can't travel because they haven't got a car. You've got to make space for them. So there's an opportunity to create that space for a moral reason, and then let us all try it. And that's why the moment right now is so important.
But I mean, has the last few months actually shown that campaigns and politics, don't really change things very effectively? Necessity and emergencies do.
Yeah, I think we have to have a catalyst for change. And so there's two things. I mean, right now, we could have ignored that third of households who don't have access to a car, and just shrug our shoulders and get on with it. And then some councils are doing exactly that. But government has said, right now, we have an opportunity now where we can help those people in the short time, and we have a moral obligation to do so. And at the same time, we're giving people a try before you buy opportunity in using your street space differently. And hey, people, even if it's wrong, we can tweak the cones to get it right, or if you don't like it after 6 months, we'll take it out. Why wouldn't we even try? So you've got multiple reasons coming together to give you an option to try using street space differently, and those options would never come about, wouldn't have come about by any other circumstances than we've just run into right now.
I mean, just explain, what is good and what is bad in that situation.
I think what we boiled it down in Greater Manchester is that, listen, it's got to be usable and want to be used by a competent 12-year-old, and that give their parents enough confidence to let them. So if you think about that proxy, if you cater for that individual, you've catered for the elderly, people who are a bit wobbly, people who haven't ridden a bike since childhood, all the people who are currently driving 1 kilometre journeys in a car, because this has got nothing to do with cyclists. They've already made a choice. This is to do with people in the car and what they would need to see when they look out the window that would make them think, oh, I quite fancy that. Because if they don't, why would they get out the car?
What's been your own approach with your own family? I mean, have you always let your children cycle wherever they wanted?
Well, it's really hard, actually. So only one of my 6 kids is, I would classify him as a cyclist in the traditional lycra sense. The rest are normal, and they just use bikes to get around as a form of transport. My daughter has just started to want to do that. She's 15, to go up to the local shops and things where she's been in the house for months and bored, and she wants to go out to go and get a loaf or whatever it is. And it makes me nervous, which in turn makes me angry, because that's not fair. Why should she not be able to do something that's good for her and good for all of us? And that's not right. And it's the reason, actually, why I got into this job, the political side, over 10 years ago now, because Agatha, the previous house that we lived in was 600 metres from a beautiful cycleway that we've got that runs right down the Wirral Peninsula where I live, called the Wirral Way and Park, and 600 metres away. And I wouldn't let her ride there. I wouldn't even want to ride that 600 metres with her. This is a fairly typical village, not massive dual carriageways, and that's not right. And that's what gives me the passion to get involved in the politics, because if you ask a parent, would you want that for your kids? They'll all say yes, but they don't want to give anything up for it. So that's the bit that we have to push through.
You obviously had, and if you don't want to talk about this, is absolutely fine. I mean, you had a personal tragedy with your mother a couple of years ago. How did that change things for you?
It didn't change anything. I still haven't really worked out how to talk about it or how to deal with it. It's just it's hard to find words really to describe what a desperate waste of a life, and somebody who packed everything in. My mother, even in her late 70s, is riding a bike more than me. She was out on a 50-mile ride when she was hit by somebody, and it's just horrific. But I think it's just a horrific irony that this is something I was passionate about, and it underscored in the most terrible way why I'm passionate about it and why we need to treat road crime as proper crime. The consequences for my father now, who's living out the rest of his life on his own, and all the people that my mother connected with. She used to take young groups of kids out on bikes. She tended the local flower beds in the village. That person's just gone in a horrific way, and just through carelessness. So I think it adds fuel. It was a path I was already on, but it certainly adds fuel. And I didn't talk about it at the time. I didn't want to use my mother's death as a lever to get attention, to draw attention to this. I probably should have done. I just don't think I'm strong enough to have dealt with it. But it certainly gives me empathy with people who've been in this position, and adds to the passion to just change the place we live, to just make nicer places to live.
Did it affect, the willingness of anyone in the family to go out on their bikes? Did it scare people?
It's probably affected mine. Truth be told, I don't like riding on roads a lot. I will actively seek out paths and tracks and trails to use. I'll think about what point in a day I'm going out on a bike. And it's as much as it upsets me to see other people, or people driving a car and treating people who are on foot or by bike as an obstacle to be avoided rather than another human being. And I think the only way that we're going to tackle that, because it's sadly human nature, is to have penalties that are commensurate with the damage that can be done. 12 point. I mean, once you get done for your 4th time, a 12-point system, you should be out of there. You can forget exceptional hardship, which is just a standard go-to excuse. 12 points. You've had 3 goes, and on the 4th time, we're going to take your license away. And potentially we're going to take your license away for good. You know, you've had 4 goes at this, and right now you've got people with tens and scores of points, and it's just normal. So we need to stop that being normal. And equally, we need to give people space. So we just need to do what the Netherlands did in the 70s and say, right, we're going to change the hierarchy of streets. So we can all still use the streets by all these different modes, but people walking are first, and people riding bikes are second, and deliveries, public transport, and then private cars. And then we're going to legislate and fund reflecting those decisions. And we're at a point where we might just start to be thinking about doing that properly.
What do you think of tricycles and trailers? Because they do have an effect on the space on the road.
I've tried a tricycle, and when you ride a bike, it's really hard because you can't lean over. My wife had one a decade or so ago, and she put the kids on a little seat on the back, and they went to school. And she really likes it, and she's a bit wobbly. She has balance issues, and she felt comfortable on it. And I got on it once, and I just rode off the edge of the road. For somebody who uses a bike, I found it really difficult. I think some of the trailers are incredible. They're really they attach low down on a bike. You can get out of the saddle normally, and you can take your kids, or you can take a pet, or you can go and get a weekly shop and then disattach it afterwards. And it's a genuine alternative to a car. I've just given up my car, actually, just before COVID. And it was a real bottler of a decision. I spent 2 months trying it out, doing things locally by bike, getting on a train. If I absolutely need to, I think I've done it once in 6 months, hire a car to go and do some work. And it's okay. It's okay. So things like trailers are suddenly starting to get more interesting to me.
What drove you to that? Was it? I mean, is it an experiment, or is it environmental?
Yes, it is.
Or
it's an experiment, and it's not overly. I'm not. I think what was the term you used at the start? An evangelist about it. Or at least I hope I'm not a zealot. I can just see the benefits, and they're all nice, and they're all things that people want. But to be able to talk about it with authority, I've got to try it. And I started. We had 2 cars in our family, and I was doing 25,000 miles a year at least. And I actually used that as an intro to connect with people who are drivers, to say, listen, I'm like you. I do this. I just want to do less of it. But I also think I need to try being without and understand from an experiential perspective the barriers that are in my way and the small things that I need, like parking, just parking a bike up securely. Where is that around these shops? I need to have that. So yes, it's an experiment, and one I hope that will stick.
So how's it changed your life?
Well, it's not a fair experiment just yet, because our lives are very local. We are doing this not in a studio, we're doing it from our homes. So I'm not sure it's a fair experiment just yet. But I save a lot of money. I mean, I had quite a posh Audi, frankly, and when you take into account depreciation and other things, I'm saving £800 a month. That's one hell of a family holiday every year. And I think that's the terms that we need to start talking about this, the things that it enables you to do, not what's taken away. I've got, nearly 10 grand a year extra because I haven't got that car. So I can hire a car if I want, and I can go on some great holidays. And that's a real plus as far as I'm concerned.
We should just talk about sort of making bikes a bit as well. I mean, how involved are you in that, and how innovative? I mean, you were known for the Lotus bike, which was a piece of innovation. And then, as you say, the research and development arm of your work was all about aerodynamics. Are your bikes as innovative as you were?
I think, well, horses for courses, really. I mean, it's what's that saying about luck? It's readiness meets opportunity. So somebody approached me back in 2007 and said, listen, I think we can do a better job than other people at making bikes. And because I like making things, rather than talking about can we use your name to badge stuff up, which is just not interesting, can we make bikes that are fit for commuting, mountain biking? I'm sure we could do this better. And we did. So my company started in 2007, and it just happened to be the year that we got the Tour de France came to London, and then we went into 2008 and 8 gold medals at the Olympics, and cycling suddenly became really visible and really popular. So it was a beautiful opportunity. And we made the first £1,000 carbon fibre bike. which just wasn't done. You could get a carbon fibre bike for £1,000. And we actually sponsored some of the Olympic athletes, and one of them, Nicole Cook, utilised one of the bikes that you could go and buy in Halfords, one of the frames rather, with a different spec of equipment, to win a gold medal, and that was pretty cool. And I really like the creative aspect. So I have right of sign off to this day, even though Halfords have now acquired the company. I'm still chairman and I have right of sign off on every nut and bolt. And I love it. And I wouldn't give that up, because that's the bit that's good fun.
And what's your view of e-bikes?
Well, e-bikes are a real game changer. They don't appeal to me personally, but they are a game changer in the sense that if you look at any studies, there's been some great ones in France that showed that 30% of people who are buying e-bikes would not have considered another kind of bike. And my own straw poll of my family is that we've got a couple hanging up in the garage, and that's the only ones that they'll use, and they wouldn't have used another kind of bike. So the potential to get people out of cars or to give people an alternative to a car is enormous. It takes away the fear of hills, headwinds, and they've just exploded. They've been in Europe for a decade, and the UK just didn't see it. And suddenly in the last 12 months or so, we've gone, hang on, these are really good fun. I mean, electric cars, my wife has got a small electric car. They're just a red herring. They don't get you any fitter. They don't take up less space. They don't deal with congestion. They don't deal with your health. They still pollute, both in manufacture and tyre and brake wear. But e-bikes really make a difference. So subsidise the hell out of them. Give people a reason to buy them. Do
you think you're going to see this? Is it going to happen in your lifetime?
Yeah, I think for different reasons. I think through necessity. The climate change is this enormous crisis that dwarfs, it's exponentially bigger than the coronavirus, but we've just stopped talking about it for a few months. It's not gone away. We've got a health crisis, and people go outside and clap for the NHS and then drive a kilometre to the shops. All of those things are tackled by changing the way we move about locally. And I think for many of those reasons that this is going to stick this time around. And we're starting to, bikes have just got into the general language. They're in the daily news. You've got transport secretaries and the Prime Minister. It's part of their language all of the time. We've never had that before. And I think people are getting used to the fact that this is going to be part of our future. So it's pretty exciting. I think it's going to be hard, all changes. Culture change is always hard. It's always painful. It's always slow. But we're there now, and I think we've genuinely started to take it as a serious form of transport.
And if you could just wave a magic wand and deliver perhaps one aspect of this revolution, what would it be?
I think more than anything else, it's very naive, but I would say follow the evidence. It's as simple as that. Just do what evidence dictates you should be doing, and we'd all arrive at the same answers. I've mentioned before in this discussion that we are drowning in evidence. We are not using it to make decisions. We know that the benefit cost ratio of building to enable people to ride bikes and the benefit cost ratio of enabling people to drive cars, they just don't compare once you take into account all the factors. We are subsidising car use to the tune of £800 per person, every man, woman and child, whether you have a car or not in this country. Whereas if you actually pay for people to ride bikes, that actively pays back, and it's evidence that we're ignoring. So I think the single thing would be follow the evidence.
Chris Boardman, thank you very much indeed. Thanks for joining us on Ways to Change the World. I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, then please do give us a rating and a review. You can watch all of these interviews on the Channel 4 News YouTube channel. Our producer is Melina Dambelli. Until next time, bye-bye.